2 Kings 13, verses 14 through 19 say this. Now Elisha had been suffering from the illness from which he died. Joash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. When he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared, you will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. What is up, you guys? It is me, SEC. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for another devotional / Bible study. I'm so excited to be with y'all today as we talk about pursuing the promise as well as just not stopping short. At the beginning of the video, I opened with 2 Kings 13, 14 through 19. And this is the story of Jehoash, king of Israel, coming to Elisha, who was this great prophet at the time, as he is dying. And the king of Israel is just pouring out his heart and grieving Elisha because he recognizes the power of God that rests on Elisha. He recognizes that God is with Elisha. And with that grievance also comes behind the fear that with the passing of Elisha, the presence of God will leave Israel. So we see here that Joash is like, help me out here, dude. Before you go, do one more thing for me, please. And Elisha says, okay, grab a bow and arrow, and we'll go, and I'm gonna show you something. So the king grabs the bow, and something super cool happens in verse 16. We see that he takes the bow in his hands, and then Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. So we got this frail, on his deathbed prophet putting his hands over a king of Israel, a king that would have grown up his entire life learning how to do swordplay, how to shoot bows and arrow. Like, he knows weaponry, okay? And this guy's putting his hands over it. Like, what's happening here? Well, we can see that Joash already associates Elisha with the power of God. We already see that he associates that. So by putting his hands on top of the king's, it's not necessarily to help him out in his aim, more so than it is a symbol of God's presence and God's hand over Israel. And then the symbolism goes even a little bit further as we go down in the verses, and we see in verse 17 that Elisha declares that the arrow represents the arrow of victory for Israel. And not only that, but it's the arrow of victory over Aram, their enemies. So the king pulls back, shoots the arrow. He has been given the tools that he needs. He's been fully equipped and fully informed, because Elisha doesn't just tell the king, hey, shoot this arrow, and give no context whatsoever. Rather, he says, hey, what you're doing right now is symbolic of the deliverance that God is going to have in you, through you, for Israel over Aram. So he was equipped, he was informed, but he still stopped short. Because we see down in verses 18 through 19 that he is told again to take the arrows and strike the ground, but he only struck them 3 times. And Elisha reprimands him, saying, hey, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, but now, because you stopped short, you're only going to have deliverance over Aram 3 times. Because you stopped short, because you didn't continue in your obedience, because you didn't continue in your faith, you're going to only have this much when you could have had this much. And so what we're going to talk about today is, what can we learn from Jehoash? What can we learn from his disobedience to help in our obedience in pursuing the promise that God has got for us? First of all, the question we could start off by asking is, what has God given you? What has he equipped you with already to step out in faith and to be obedient in, to pursue the promise that he has over you? Because God gave Jehoash the bow and arrows, and he had those, and that was deliverance in his hands, but he had to be obedient in pulling back the arrow and releasing it to fulfill the promise that God had. And he had to be obedient in continuing to use it, not to just use it the one time, not to just strike the ground 3 times. He had to continually use it and fulfill the promise that way, through his obedience and through his faith. So first of all, what has God given you that you can be using in obedience to him in pursuing what he has for you? But while you think about that, we're also going to be talking about 2 areas we need to evaluate when pursuing the promise. So the first is our motivation, and the second is our dedication. So first, our motivation. What was the king of Israel motivated by? He was motivated by his desire for victory. He was motivated by the idea of having freedom from his enemies. However, we see that motivation of victory was not strong enough. We see that he was motivated at the beginning, but through whatever reasoning, he ended up falling short. We see that, he wanted the victory, but how much did he want it? How much did he want this thing? He was motivated by the victory, the idea of being the conqueror, and that once he started pulling back, we don't know if he got tired or if he got embarrassed or what made him stop short. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that. I think it kind of leaves that up for interpretation, because for each and every one of us, it may be different. We may be getting tired by people making fun of us for our faith, or we maybe get tired of hearing over and over again how another door is closed, or we may be getting embarrassed by sharing our faith, or we may be getting embarrassed and scared and fearful of what others may think of us, or by doing this one thing, what that could do to another thing in our lives. And so whatever that thing in our lives that hinders our motivation is, I think that's kind of why we're not told what made him stop short. For me, I think it was probably embarrassment, because I'm just thinking, if I had a bow and arrow and I'm just pulling it and striking the ground, and somebody passes by and looks at me getting cozy with this prophet, it might be a little embarrassing, because you're not shooting at anything other than the ground, and it's just I could see that. But it's not the point of embarrassment, and it's not the point of whatever it may be that hinders our motivation. It is the strength of what we're motivated by. So if you're wanting to pursue this career, is it because you want more money, or is it because you want to share your story with more people in this way, or is it because you want to help people, or is it because you want to move to a new city? What is that motivation in what you're pursuing the promise that you have? What is that motivation in pursuing the desires of your heart? What is that thing that just is your driving force? We see that if it's not built on things above, it will fall short, and we will stop short every single time. Colossians 3:23-24 says this: "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." Our motivation should be in being a servant of Christ. Why do we do what we do? Because we want to serve the Lord. because we want to make his name known. That is our motivation, not because we want more money, not because we want to have a new job, not because we just don't want to be lonely anymore. It's because we want to serve him. And so everything we do, everything we desire should stem from that. Our motivation should be built in the ultimate power source, because if it's plugged into anything else, we will fall short every single time. We will get tired, we'll get beat down, and we will just eventually stay there. We'll eventually take our hands off the bow and say, that's it, I'm done. That's all I got to give. When we're plugged into the true source and our motivation is built upon the true source, that is when we can strike the ground more than once. That's when we can strike it 5 to 6 to however many times the Lord has called us to strike it. The second area we need to evaluate is our dedication. The king stopped at 3 arrows. But Elisha says, hey, you should have kept going. You should have done 5 or 6. The thing is, we never know which arrow will be the arrow of deliverance. We don't know when that small action that you thought made no big difference makes the biggest difference, because you kept on being obedient, because you kept on doing what the Lord had called you to. So we never know what arrow will be the arrow of deliverance. So we just keep shooting. So just keep shooting in your pursuit of Christ-like mannerisms. Keep shooting in the fight against sin. Keep shooting in the desire for godly wisdom. Keep shooting in the desire for godly marriage. Keep shooting in the areas that you feel the weakest. Keep shooting in the strength of God, because if you got to keep shooting, because the enemy, the world, is going to keep shooting at you. Your area of defense comes through the word. This is our sword. This is our power source. So the only way we have any actual defense against the attacks of the enemy is through his word. It's through taking up the sword, taking up our bow and arrow, and keep shooting, keep pursuing, keep strengthening and learning and growing, even when we don't understand it, even when we're like, God, I'm just shooting at the ground. What is this even supposed to be doing? You never know when the arrow of deliverance is coming. That thought of never knowing which action will be the action that makes the biggest change, but continuing to be dedicated in doing it, that is also reflected in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 6. It says, sow your seed in the morning and at evening. Let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, whether both will do equally well. You never know the difference you will make in someone else's life through your actions or through your words. You never know the difference. The one simple step of faith can change the trajectory of your life. You never know until you continue doing it, and you slowly see that each step of faith leads you closer and closer to the goal of heaven, to the goal of becoming more like Christ and pursuing him. And then you look back and you're like, oh, I see what you did there, God. I see that arrow of deliverance there, and in that area, and in that area. And it slowly builds up and builds up. And the more you pursue it, the farther away you get back from who you used to be to who you want to be. The thing is, it's hard to be dedicated. The whole point of dedication is to continually pursue something. It's to continually work at something. And that is no easy feat. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, it says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Absolutely just, that right there is just so good. If you have ever done any kind of sport, you know it takes some dedication. You can't just go on to the day of the game or to the day of the meet and show up and expect to win. You have to go through months and months of daily practice to prepare your mind and to prepare your body to be properly equipped to do that thing, whatever that thing may be, whether it's shooting a basketball or hitting a baseball or throwing a football, whatever it may be. It takes practice, it takes dedication. Just like a runner, oh my goodness, I did cross country and I was not very good, but I did it. And it takes dedication. It's not just going to practice, it's also changing the way you eat, it's changing the way you just think in general, because you have to be like, okay, I've got a meet coming up, like I need to carb load on this day, I need to keep my water intake up so I don't get dehydrated and get cramps, I need to do this and I need to do that, in addition to the practice, in addition to all the other stuff that has been leading up to that moment of the meet. So when Paul here in 1 Corinthians is talking about running the race set before us, that takes dedication. We're all living this life. Whether you're a believer or you're not, we all have to keep on trucking along. But wouldn't you much rather have a purpose? Wouldn't you much rather have a motivation that's greater than yourself, to pursue something that is greater than yourself? Because when we start to pursue something that is not just of us, but when our motivations are set on God, when their motivations are set above, and our dedication is to pursuing that motivation, that is what changes everything. We're no longer running just to run. We're running towards the prize. We're running towards a greater crown that anything this world could offer us. We're running not to stop short of the finish line, but to continue running on. When I was running cross country, my coaches would say, when you see the finish line, don't slow down, speed up. Keep running through the line. You don't stop when you get to the finish line, you run through the line. That's the same for you and I as Christians, as believers of Christ, as followers. We are to continually pursue the goal of heaven, to run as to get the crown, not to just be a runner, not to just be like, hey, as long as I finish the race, I won. In my heart of hearts, just as long as I can get through the next day, I'm fine. Some days may be like that, but our goal in life should be to pursue a life of not stopping short, but to finish through, to run the race, to be the one that gets the crown. And not only that, to run the race with others, to gather together and say, okay, we can do this. We're going to train together. We're going to learn together. We're going to pursue this greater thing together. Because for running, you can do it by yourself. I mean, even for shooting arrows, you can do it yourself. Archery, it's technically a solo sport. Running's a solo sport. You only have to beat yourself and your best at that time. But when you do it together, you have accountability there. You start to say, listen, your motivation maybe could be adjusted a little bit. And, they can say to you, hey, you might want to be a little more dedicated in that area today, And there's that accountability that comes like, hey, you might not want to start eating carbs today. Let's eat a salad instead. We need to be ready for that race on Friday. We need to be ready for the time that the Lord comes. We need to be ready for when someone comes up to us and asks us why we believe what we believe. We need to pursue the promise that God has in our life, not in a mentality of Joash, of where we're like, when it gets hard, I'm going to stop. When it gets embarrassing, I'm going to stop. when I feel like it, I'm going to stop. Instead, we need to keep saying, hey, I'm going to keep shooting the arrow. Until the Lord calls me home, until the Lord tells me to stop, I'm going to keep shooting the arrows. Because, once again, you never know when that arrow of deliverance is coming. You never know what small action will lead to big change. So I encourage each and every one of us today to evaluate what our motivation is and what our dedication is in pursuing the promise, in pursuing whatever God has called you to, whatever God has placed on your heart. And if you don't feel like God's called you to anything, if you don't feel like, hey, this is really what the Lord has been speaking to me, we all are called to run the race. We're all called to pursue a more godly life, to pursue the goal of heaven. And as we're pursuing it, we're called to bring others alongside us. We're called to be one with each other, to be the body of Christ, to be united for His glory and His glory alone. I pray that each and every one of us today would be encouraged not to stop short, but to finish strong. Thank you guys so much for joining me today as we go over 2 Kings 13, 14 through 19. I just love being able to dig deeper into God's Word. And if you do too, and you are encouraged by this video, then don't forget to hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.